An alarm rings out, echoing off the cold metallic walls of the prison. Guards scramble up the stairs, their boots clanging in frantic unison. All eyes are fixed on the source of the chaos. A single cell that holds a scene straight out of a horror story. The prison medical team arrives, racing against time to stabilize the critically injured women. One is a convicted robber, a seasoned criminal hardened by years behind bars. But it's the other inmate who sends a jolt of fear rippling through the staff. In today's episode of the Infographics Show, we'll peel back the layers of Joanna Dennehy's chilling story and reveal why she is considered the most feared woman in prison. In the British justice system, a whole life sentence is a rarity, reserved for the most heinous of crimes. Of the 100 sentences handed down over the years, only 4 women in history have ever faced this unforgiving judgment. The first, Myra Hindley, etched her name into infamy as one half of the Moors murderers, confessing to the brutal killings of the 2 boys between 1963 and 1965. Rose West followed, a name synonymous with horror, aiding her husband in torturing and murdering at least 10 women across Gloucester from 1973 to 1987. Lucy Letby was a trusted nurse who was convicted in 2023 for the chilling murders of 7 innocent babies under her care, a case that left the nation reeling. And then there's Dennehy, who's been locked up since 2013 for some of the most shocking murders the United Kingdom has ever seen. But her reign of terror didn't end at the prison gates. From the moment Joanna Dennehy arrived at HM Prison Bronzefield in 2013, she cemented her reputation as one of Britain's most notorious prisoners. Her behavior was so horrifying that she was quickly transferred to HM Prison Low Newton, a high-security facility designed for the country's most dangerous offenders. She's been involved in attacks on fellow prisoners, plots against guards and the prison itself, and is seen as a serious danger to both others and herself. That has led to her being surrounded by a level of security that is very rarely seen outside of the most violent and depraved male prisoners. And even they might take one look at this woman and decide it's safer to walk the other way. If you look at Dennehy, you probably wouldn't see what makes her so dangerous. She looks like an ordinary woman, albeit with a strange star tattoo on one cheek. But below the surface, she has a dangerous personality, a propensity for extreme violence, and is one of the most unpredictable and psychopathic killers British psychiatrists have ever worked with. Few female prisoners in the UK require heavy security, and the private prison she's found herself at is meant to house female and juvenile offenders of all security levels. But at all points, she has escalated her violence and made herself one of the most feared criminals in Britain. And the signs were there all along, even from an early age. Joanna Dennehy was born in 1982, and her parents had high hopes for the girl. They even paid extra tuition so she could get to a better school, one they hoped would set her on the path to becoming a lawyer. She would wind up in contact with the law, but not the way they were hoping. By the time she was a teenager, she was already on the wrong path, skipping school regularly, hanging out with older boys, and using drugs and alcohol. When she was 15, she met a 20-year-old named John Traynor. The older man convinced her to run away with him, leaving her parents to endure years of silence and unanswered questions. And when she resurfaced, her decline had only accelerated. During the time she was with Traynor, Dennehy had 2 children while she was still in her teens. Even though she didn't have any contact with her parents for a number of years, she eventually made contact with them. They were no doubt excited to find out they had grandchildren, even if the situation was disturbing. But that happiness was shattered when the true reason for her visit emerged. Joanna demanded money, threatening to withhold access to her children unless her parents paid up. When they stood their ground and refused her extortion, she severed contact once again. The next time they would see her, she would be in the news. Dennehy and her partner moved to East Anglia, where her life spiraled into chaos. She became a habitual drinker with a short temper and prone to mean and violent outbursts. She became increasingly paranoid, even carrying a knife with her in her boot at all times. And it wasn't just random fights she was looking for. Her rage was often directed at Traynor, whom she frequently attacked. What began as bursts of aggression soon escalated into relentless physical abuse. The situation became so unbearable that Traynor finally left, taking their children with him. In the years to come, everyone who met Dennehy would tell investigators that she seemed like a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Violence was inevitable when she was around. They had no idea how right they were. Over the years, Dennehy had several minor and not-so-minor run-ins with the law. These encounters provided psychiatrists and analysts with repeated opportunities to study her complex and dangerous psyche. She was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, and doctors said she seemed to get a sexual thrill from inflicting pain on others. But they couldn't keep her locked up for long, and regardless of the help she was given, she always went back to her old ways. But no one knew how fast she would escalate, and that the entire city would be in the line of fire once she truly got started up. In 2013, the bodies started to show up. An acquaintance, later interviewed by police, revealed chilling details about Dennehy's behavior. According to them, there were plenty of warning signs about her deadly intentions, but no one took her seriously until it was too late. Dennehy openly talked about wanting to kill, specifically targeting men, while insisting she would never harm a woman, especially one with children. Of course, a woman killer is fairly rare, especially one without an accomplice, and one targeting men is even rarer, given the likely size difference and the difficulty of pulling off a kill, which is why Dennehy picked her victims carefully. Unlike many killers, Dennehy knew all of her victims, and in some cases lured them in like a spider to a fly. Her first man, Lucas Sławaszewski, was a Polish man in Peterborough who was simply looking for a good time. After exchanging texts with Dennehy, he agreed to meet her at a location she promised would lead to some fun. Instead, he walked straight into an ambush. Dennehy stabbed him through the heart in a brutal attack. She then stuffed his lifeless body into a wheeled garbage bin and transported it to a ditch outside Peterborough. But this was just the beginning. Dennehy had a taste for blood, and she wouldn't wait long to strike again. And her next target would be much closer to home, her 56-year-old roommate, John Chapman. Chapman had no reason to suspect anything was up with Dennehy. That was until she snuck up on him with a pocket knife and stabbed him 5 times in total. Normally, this would be a very hard murder to cover up, but she had help. By this point, Gary Richards, also known as Gary Stretch, was well aware of her murderous tendencies and seemingly wanted to help. While no one else did any of the killings, Dennehy got help from several willing accomplices to help conceal the grisly aftermath. She kept the killing for herself, and she had been building up to her third target. Kevin Lee was a successful landlord and a real estate businessman who employed Dennehy. Over time, she developed a simmering resentment toward the man who, in her eyes, held control over multiple aspects of her life. She used her best tool, her manipulation and sex appeal, to lure him into a trap and stab him fatally. She dumped him in the same place as the other two, the Peterborough ditches. But she saved some extra cruelty for him. She dressed his corpse in a black sequin dress and posed it in a humiliating way. It was clear she'd been building to this one for a while, fueled by a deep-seated hatred. And so, Joanna Dennehy became England's most terrifying female serial killer. Right? Not exactly. In analyzing her crimes, investigators would say that she better fit the definition of a spree killer. Serial killers are often methodical, careful planners who choose and target their victims over the course of many years. They move around a lot, and they've carefully planned methods for disposing of the corpses or keeping them out of sight. Dennehy, meanwhile, killed all of her victims within a 10-day period and dumped their bodies near each other. She was consumed by the intoxicating thrill of killing, showing no concern for self-preservation or the risk of being caught. Her only focus was the next victim. After those 3 killings, Dennehy and Stretch continued their rampage, driving around Hereford looking for more victims. Soon, she would attack a pair of dog walkers that they saw on the street. Both men were seriously but not fatally wounded. Yet, in a final act of cold-hearted cruelty, she stole the second man's dog, adding insult to the already devastating ordeal. This brazen broad daylight attack soon led to her arrest, and it wouldn't be long before she was tied to the other deaths. Shockingly, probation officers had been monitoring Dennehy even as she began her murderous spree. Despite her prior criminal convictions, the inexperienced staff failed to recognize the warning signs, allowing her rampage to escalate unchecked. It was a spree of violence unlike anything this quiet corner of England had ever witnessed, and when the trial finally began, chaos was inevitable. Or would it be? Dennehy was anything but predictable. In November that same year, before the trial could get underway, Dennehy pled guilty to all 3 murders and 2 attempted murders. Her sister speculated that it was so she could be in control of the situation, something she was always obsessed with. Throughout the sentencing process, Dennehy's behavior was chilling. She showed no remorse, frequently laughing as the details of her crimes were recounted. Her disturbing demeanor likely influenced the judge's decision to impose a rare whole-life sentence, ensuring she would spend the rest of her days behind bars. Only 16 inmates are currently serving this term in the UK. All are infamous murderers. Her accomplice, Stretch, would receive a life sentence for attempted murder, with the possibility of release after 19 years, and 2 other accomplices would receive prison terms of 14 and 3 years. Dennehy was headed behind bars for life. But that wasn't going to stop her violent ways. The most violent criminals in prison often rise to dominance, becoming the king or queen of their own corner of hell. Other inmates answer not only to the guards, but to the prison's self-styled mob boss. A small-time burglar serving 3 to 5 years has everything to lose, but a drug kingpin or a convicted murderer with no hope of release, they have nothing to fear. Another murder is just a message to maintain their power. In women's prisons, these apex predators are rare, which make Joanna Dennehy all the more dangerous. The prison Dennehy was headed for, HM Prison Bronzefield, didn't have too many convicts of her caliber. As the largest women's prison in Europe, this privately run facility houses a wide range of offenders, from young offenders to adults serving sentences of all levels. It even has a branch of the Women's Institute, a nonprofit organization aimed at helping inmates find jobs and reintegrate into society before their release. However, it had also been criticized heavily for overcrowding, staff turnover, and a lack of strict routine. It was tasked with managing teenage offenders awaiting trial, white-collar criminals serving short sentences, and the utterly depraved killers. And Dennehy couldn't wait to turn Bronzefield into her own private hall of terror. While she remained in prison awaiting trial, she was placed in the most restrictive general housing there, and soon after that she would be caught with a disturbing passage in her diary. It detailed an escape plan, but it was more like a sadistic fantasy. She intended to kill a prison guard, sever their finger, using that digit to bypass the security system's fingerprint scanner. It was likely all a sick daydream, but it was enough for the prison to place her in solitary confinement for the better part of 2 years. And this would not be good for her mental state. She would eventually be released from solitary, now serving a life sentence, and it was time for her to be placed with a cellmate. Given Dennehy's depraved nature, the prison was understandably cautious. However, her apparent disinterest in harming women gave them hope that she might be able to coexist with another inmate. She was paired with Haley Palmer, who was doing a 16-year robbery sentence. Palmer's parents filed an objection, but with no sign of violence by Dennehy, the prison decided to let the partnership go ahead. And they hit it off, maybe a little too much. Dennehy and Palmer soon entered a romantic relationship, a bizarre touch of normalcy amid the chaos of prison life. However, it wasn't long before Dennehy made headlines again, this time for suing the prison, claiming the trauma of her time in solitary confinement. She hired a top lawyer, Hugh Southley, who claimed that the treatment amounted to a violation of her human rights. He painted Dennehy as a disturbed young woman who needed help rather than punishment. The prison countered that she wasn't in punitive segregation, but rather in an isolation cell that allowed her to access media and even supervised exercise. That, combined with how dangerous Dennehy was known to be, led the judge to dismiss her lawsuit. It was back to the cells, but maybe there was another way out. Dennehy would spend the next few years in Bronzefield, and she and Palmer would seem to be a happy couple. They even filed a request for permission to marry in 2018, something which worried Palmer's family even more. After all, Dennehy was known for being a master manipulator who had many accomplices during her brief killing spree. If she could convince several men and women to throw their lives away assisting a spree killer, what could she convince their daughter to do? They would find out in horrifying fashion soon enough. It was late 2018 when the guards raced to the cell and found Dennehy and Palmer both severely wounded. They were immediately taken for emergency medical treatment, and despite their injuries, survived. The incident made one thing clear: they could no longer be housed together. The prison was clearly not comfortable putting Dennehy with another cellmate, given that she had been proven to be a threat to them. It was time for Dennehy to be moved to another prison, one suited to the woman often called the most dangerous woman in Britain. Welcome to the British version of Supermax. HM Prison Low Newton is a closed prison, the highest level of security in Britain, and one specifically designed for female offenders. It serves the entire north of England, and it is infamous for violence and for notorious inmates. In 1998, a tense hostage situation unfolded when a female inmate armed with scissors took a guard captive, demanding drugs. The standoff ended when police intervened, subduing the prisoner with a taser. It's also home to the only mental facility in England designed to treat women with dangerous and severe personality disorders. All of that comes together into the kind of facility where Dennehy would be in good company, and she wasted no time making friends as only she could. Not long after arriving, Dennehy reportedly got into an altercation with Rose West, the UK's most notorious female murderer. The partner in crime of serial killer Fred West, she was responsible for murdering at least 10 people. In her late 60s, by the time she met Dennehy, she was no doubt a feared figure there, which led Dennehy to threaten to kill her. While the prison denied any report of violence between the two, West was transferred to another prison. Most of the prisoners in Low Newton are high-level criminals serving long sentences, including many murderers. But that didn't stop Dennehy from finding some willing prey. Emma Aitken, a 19-year-old who received 12 years for participating in a murder at a club, soon began a relationship with Dennehy, and the guards were watching very carefully. With far less freedom in this high-security prison, Dennehy's aggressive behavior appeared to subside, at least for a while. However, those who worked with her knew it was only a matter of time before her true nature resurfaced. There was about to be a shocking twist to her story. How about a love triangle? Having narrowly survived her last encounter with Dennehy, Haley Palmer likely considered herself fortunate. Adding to her relief, she had recently completed her 16-year sentence for robbery and was finally released. Yet despite her freedom, one of her first plans was to visit Dennehy, whose relationship with Aitken had ended. Palmer seemed to be just as in love with her dangerous paramour as ever, with the two even becoming engaged in 2021. There was just one condition to the engagement. Haley wanted Joanna to swear off the killings, and Joanna reluctantly agreed. But there was a lot of obstacles standing in the way of their potential marriage. Despite Haley talking like a wide-eyed schoolgirl, the two weren't going to be going on a honeymoon anytime soon. Dennehy was never going to get out of prison, and Palmer even joked that cutting the wedding cake in prison would probably be out of the question, no knives allowed. But despite this, the odd romance got a lot of media coverage, and Palmer wasn't the only person fascinated with this twisted killer. True crime is always big business, so it's no surprise that eventually it got to the Peterborough Ditch murders. First, she was featured in a documentary that aired in the UK and Ireland in 2021, titled The Murderer and Me, Joanna Dennehy. And then, not long after, her ex, John Trainer, appeared on an episode of a series titled The Killer in My Family to tell his side of the story. But as for the woman herself, many people still considered her a ticking time bomb. Reports suggest that even behind bars, Dennehy continues to devise schemes, writing letters to men in hopes of luring them to the prison, where she could turn them into prey. While this plan seems far-fetched given her whole life sentence, psychologists argue that her compulsion to kill is a deeply rooted urge unlikely to fade anytime soon. Now surrounded only by women, Dennehy might be forced to find new twisted methods to satisfy her dark cravings. At least she has the title of most notorious woman in British history. Dennehy seemed to have calmed down over the last few years, with relatively few reports of her causing trouble in Low Newton. But that might change with the latest arrival at the prison. Dennehy was arguably the most infamous young killer in England. But in 2023, Lucy Letby was sent to Low Newton. Convicted for the chilling murders of 7 babies under her care as a nurse, Letby's crimes also included 15 counts of attempted murder, solidifying her as one of the nation's most reviled figures. Are these two infamous killers about to come into conflict? On one hand, Dennehy has shown little interest in targeting women, often stating that she would never harm a mother with children. Her self-imposed code seems to extend to a soft spot for her children, making Letby's horrific crimes, preying on the most vulnerable, utterly repulsive to her. If given the opportunity, Dennehy's likely response would be violence, but of course, she won't. She's in a maximum security prison. And that's the reason why Dennehy has largely quieted down as a threat. She's in a place that's prepared for the most dangerous inmates and carefully monitors her to keep her away from anyone who might be vulnerable to her. But that might just mean that Dennehy has them right where she wants them. Dennehy is an unusual type of killer, especially for a woman. She doesn't have a clearly defined mental illness that can be medicated. She seems equally comfortable with slow, methodical, planned killings that use manipulation and bursts of brutal violence that target whoever's most convenient. But she might simply not have the opportunity to hurt any of her preferred targets. Low Newton not only doesn't have any male prisoners, it doesn't have male guards, ostensibly to protect the inmates, but in this case, that's good news for the guards. The good news is she might be otherwise occupied. She has a wedding to plan. What drives someone like Joanna Dennehy? Was it pure compulsion or something deeper? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Now go watch The Worst Serial Killer in Every State, or click on this video instead.